You guys have literally talked to coaches all over the country on a weekly basis. You know the baseball scene inside and out. We couldn't be happier to have you on here and try to just zoom in on the baseball scene between Lake Michigan and Ohio River. And, in that regard, speaking of coaches, I mentioned earlier, I'm an easy sell, though. I'm an easy sell. I'm the cheerleader for baseball in our state. But if I look at some of these names of our D1 baseball coaches, Rich Maloney, Ball State, Dave Schrag, Butler guy, also did some time down there in Evansville. Mitch Hannes at ISU, Jeff Mercer at IU, Link Jarrett at Notre Dame, Greg Goff, new guy at Purdue, Doug Schreiber. You don't get a name that, resembles baseball more than that. Then, of course, Wes Carroll down there at UV and, Brian Schmack at Valpo. These are some great coaches. And, you guys have talked to coaches all over the country. Let's talk about those coaches for a minute before we start talking about their seasons. Mike, we'll start with you. As far as your experience and knowing, how lucky we are here in the Hoosier State to have coaches like that.
I would tell you that let me start here and then I'll get to what I think is a theme. So my freshman fall, Notre Dame, 1988, one of my teammates is a guy named Corey Robleski. And he's from LaPorte, Indiana. I grew up in suburban Philly, never left. I didn't know anything about Indiana high school baseball. And so Corey drives me and Craig Counsell was his roommate, to LaPorte, Indiana to go have dinner with the Robleskis. And part of that trip was we go to, I'll call it the LaPorte baseball complex, right? Like my high school field was the football practice field that they put bases on. And Ken Schreiber, and I'm hearing the Ken Schreiber stories about how everybody had to have their hair cut a certain way. You go to the barber in LaPorte and you say, give me a Schreiber. And, the field is immaculate. You can't even find a bubble gum wrapper on that field. And, and Corey's telling us about, winning the national title his junior year of high school. They won the state of Indiana, and it was just, I didn't even know that high school baseball could be all of those things. And so when I think about Doug, and, Doug obviously was an assistant coach at Arizona State before I was there, but I think about the late Ken Schreiber and it just, I still, every time I still text with Corey Robleski a lot. His son Ryan is a really good player at Dallas Baptist right now. And he raised his boys in Minnesota. But every time I text with Corey Robleski, I end the text with #GoSlicers. Because still to this day, I'm a little blurry on what a slicer is, but they have this incredible baseball logo. But, to answer your question, Hardy, I have two thoughts. It's the Division I coaches in your state are really strong. I mean, really strong. Hey, one of the challenges you guys have is that people know it and they come steal your coaches, right? Like Tracy Smith goes from IU to Arizona State. Chris Lemonis goes from IU to Mississippi State. I mean, IU is a great job, but it's become kind of like a job fair, for the big jobs. But, I think Jeff Mercer is perfect for IU. Doug Schreiber is perfect, for Fort Wayne. And, I think Greg Goff is a very underrated coach but the guy's got SEC head coaching experience. Link Jarrett is the next coach that I think the state has risk of losing because people have seen what he's done at Notre Dame. And I would say calling a Notre Dame game last year was one of the best coach teams I've seen in 10 years. I mean, the way they played the game, it was so intellectual. Man, it's so instinctive. So, yeah, I agree with your theory, Hardy, and I'll turn it over to RB. But, man, I think you got some dynamite coaches in the state.
Yeah. And Coach Goff is probably the one in the state that I don't have great feel for. I don't know him as well. But Terry Rooney, the recruiting coordinator, I took over for him at James Madison when he left to go to Old Dominion, and he was coaching at Old Dominion when Verlander was there. And obviously Coach Marks is an Evansville guy. But Dave Schrag at Butler took over for my dad at Evansville, was at South Dakota State when I was at Western Illinois. Coach Smack actually pitched for my boss at JMU, Spanky McFarland at Northern Illinois. I think Mitch Hannes is the most underrated coach that we have in college baseball for what he has done, and he was an assistant at Indiana State when I was playing at Evansville. His teams have always been good, and the great thing about Mitch is he will tell you they're not good. He sandbags. Every time you talk to Mitch, he's going to sandbag you. He's like, oh, we're not very good. And I'm like, Mitch, you say that every year. And then you look up and you've got 40 wins every year and you're going to be a regional team. And then I coached Wes at Evansville. That was my first 2 years. Sorry to Wes that you had to deal with me for 2 years. My first 2 years coaching, Wes was a player at Evansville for us, who was a phenomenal player at the University of Evansville. And then Jamie, his brother, and I were teammates at Evansville together. But it's very unique because the size of the state, to now have 10 Division I teams with Coach Archuleta at USI now going Division I, it's very unique for the size of the state to have that many Division I programs. But the numbers speak out to the amount of big leaguers that the state of Indiana has had. But it's not just Division I. You can go down every level of college baseball in Indiana, and they're good teams at every level. And for any of the kids that are listening in right now, I'm a good example of what staying at home does and staying in the area. You don't need to leave that state. If you have good options, and financially it works for you to stay in state, I would stay in state. It's great baseball, and all of those teams play really good schedules.
Well, and with the way that, we could have a whole conversation on the whole scholarship issue in college baseball as well. There's there's all kinds of documentation, and it's kind of a buzz topic right now for sure, on, the cost of playing outside of state, as well, when the scholarship opportunities are so limited. But so that's kind of players. Let's talk some 2020, or coaches. Let's talk some 2022 projections. And Mike, I won't hold you to the standard that you set with the torque bomb call back in 2019. That I had to throw that out there. If anybody hasn't seen that, just look up torque bomb on Twitter, and you'll see what I'm talking about. That was pure gold right there.
Good player.
As far as, if you talk to any coaches, and the coaches we've talked to, I'm sure they tell you the same thing. Preseason rankings don't mean anything at all. But for a fan like me, they do. So, we've got Notre Dame looking really good. Preseason polls, IU and ISU are always going to, be up there the way that their trajectory has been the last few years. But, we've got people like Ball State that are putting people in the bigs every year too. Looking at 2022, maybe to start with, let's talk about, are there any hidden gems, things that you might not be on the radar right now? Some teams that are going to make some movement in 2022, possibly, that the people that make these predictions aren't talking about right now.
Yeah, I would say, Hardy, your question is who are some of the teams to look out for in the state of Indiana in 2022? And I want to start with Ball State, just because, man, they had a heck of a season last year. And, they kind of run into a buzzsaw in Central Michigan in the MAC. And, Central Michigan was the only team that even gave Notre Dame any hint of trouble in that South Bend regional last year. And so Central Michigan was very good, but Ball State, you could argue, was the 65th team. They were listed as the first four out. And I thought their resume was, man, they could have easily been in the NCAA tournament. What I've read about Ball State is they did lose quite a bit of pitching, but their position player groups got a chance to be really special. And, Rich Maloney does a phenomenal job down there. So that's one. I think Purdue under Greg Goff they've done a really nice job in the transfer market. They got a really talented freshman pitcher. I think Purdue's got a chance. I think Greg Goff's the right guy for Purdue. I think they've got a chance to make a quick jump. I think I'll comment on Notre Dame, and then I'll turn it over to RB. Notre Dame is interesting. Last year, if you said to people going into the 21 season, okay, I'm going to give the ACC 10 NCAA tournament bids, 10 out of your 14 teams are going to the NCAA tournament. I'm telling you, 0 out of 100 of those people would have said, okay, Notre Dame's one of the 10. They just weren't. They just, even though they were very good in the pandemic shortened season, that, people just weren't ready to take Notre Dame seriously. And they won the dang league by 4.5 games. And so now they lost Nico Convadas, and that's 22 home runs. They lost Tanner Colehap, and he was really their silver bullet reliever. But I was looking at Notre Dame's roster last night. You look at their starting 9. It's 7 kids who are in their 4th or 5th year of college. Then you look at their pitching, and same thing. It's 5 out of their 6 top guys in their 4th or 5th year of college baseball. And for as good as Link Jarrett is, and the development from his staff, and those kids being in that program for an extended period of time, I think Notre Dame will come back to the pack a little bit this year. but I'm really starting to question that prediction of mine just based on how old they're going to be. So yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Well, and Link Jarrett has a pretty good way of turning unknown hitters into recognized hitters for sure, as you saw in the tournament even last year. Ryan, we'll bring it over to you. Anybody under the radar that you see this year?
Well, I think the interesting thing is you look early, Indiana State has a deal down in Florida, but then the next weekend they're over here at East Carolina in the Keith LeClaire Classic, which is always a really good field. But they play East Carolina, Maryland, and Michigan that weekend. So I think you're going to get a good idea of what they can do. And then actually Evansville's over here the first weekend at NC State, and then they back up and play Vandy midweek. Evansville's been right there, but Indiana State, I think for me, has always been that program in the state that has a legitimate chance to get there. And it's interesting now you got 3 Missouri Valley teams in the state with Valpo, Indiana State, and Evansville. So again, I'm a Valley guy. I'm partial to the Valley. You talk about the SEC all you want, the ACC all you want. The Missouri Valley has put as many big leaguers out there from mid-major conference as anybody in the country. So I am partial to Missouri Valley baseball. But really, I do pay attention more to Indiana State and Evansville in that state more than any of the other ones. But Jeff Mercer has done a tremendous job. I'm interested to see. I think the Big Ten they got hurt last year because of their schedule. The Big Ten Conference did not help the Big Ten teams last year because of what they did to them with their conference schedule. So hopefully they can get back to where they've been, because the last 5-6 years, they've gotten 4 or 5 teams in just about every year. And so hopefully with a full schedule for both those teams in the state, that they have a legitimate chance of making a regional.
There's a lot of northern kids that get enamored with the idea of going south to play college baseball. And then they get there and they maybe they can't get on the field right away. And then they start to get focused on, hey, like, I just want to play baseball. Like, it's not doing me any good to be down here keeping a chart in 70 degrees. I want to be on the field. And so I think the northern schools will, they will lose some really good players at times to bigger programs. But I think the kids coming back to them that just want to get on the field, that's going to be a huge advantage. RB, I wanted to just follow up on one point you made about Doug Schreiber. I mean, first of all, it's one of the best people in our game, but you mentioned his final Purdue teams. Jeff Duncan was his assistant coach and now is doing a great job at Kent State. When you think about the renaissance that the Big Ten has had in baseball over the last decade, to me, the starting point is Purdue's 2012 team. Remember, they hosted a regional, and before that time period, it was basically Ohio State and Minnesota, and Michigan hadn't been relevant since the 80s, really. And so that 2012 team, I mean, Michigan's team in 07 was tremendous, obviously, but
beat David Price in the regionals. And I will nudge a little bit before that, because, by the way, when Tracy Smith got Josh Fagley to go to IU, that changed their program, the face of their program. Yeah, because historically IU was not getting the better players in the state at that point. And when Josh Fagley decided to go to IU, and Josh struggled his freshman year, but he was a difference maker in that league. And Fagley was such a good player, played so hard. That's a guy that changes your program. One guy can actually change your program if they're that good. And as hard as he played, and Tracy had it was like IU right there, then Purdue is all right around the same time where they both went off.
Yeah, here's the timeline. Purdue hosts a regional in 2012, which just felt out of nowhere, right? And it was the regional that produced the Kent State run. Really, they hosted it in Gary, Indiana. This before the beautiful new stadium they have. So Purdue hosts in 2012. IU goes to Omaha in 2013 through Tallahassee. The IU goes to Florida State and beats them up in a super regional. They go to Omaha. 2015, Illinois is a top 8 national seed. They're hosting Dansby, Swanson, and Vanderbilt. And then, you look at Michigan in 2019 is playing in the national championship game. They're playing in game 3 of the finals. So this run that the Big Ten's had has been remarkable, and it's got Indiana, fingerprints all over it to me.
The upper Midwest states now, I don't care if it's Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Michigan, they all have good indoor facilities now, training facilities for their high school kids to train year round, which we didn't have 10, 15 years ago. You look at the amount of guys that have been drafted out of the state of Wisconsin now, Gavin Lux, Mariners. I can't remember his name.
Kelenic.
Mariners. Yep. Kelenic. Now that's hurt recruiting a little bit now too for those schools, because it used to be if you got an upper Midwest kid, he was coming to school. Like you could feel pretty good about getting a Wisconsin kid or a Minnesota kid or a Michigan kid, and they were probably going to show up on campus. That's not the case anymore, because these kids are actually ready and going to play. You talk about the Bulls playing in those national tournaments. They're playing against the best and are getting seen by scouts everywhere. That you may lose one of these kids now that you thought for sure was going to end up on campus.
You know, the secret is out that there are really good players in Indiana, and we've talked about that. You know, I think for the college scene, you know, hey, Notre Dame, Notre Dame's a wonderful place. I'm sure Link Jarrett and his family love it there, but SEC schools are going to be contacting Link Jarrett in the next few years. So if you're Notre Dame, if I had a direct line to Jack Swarbrick, I'd be saying, hey, I'm not saying you got to pay Link Jarrett like you would pay an SEC coach, because you know that paycheck comes with risks too. But you know, you can't pay him less than the SEC assistant coaches make either. So again, that's a real risk. So I think these Indiana Division I schools, you know, they are top of the you know, they're top 40 programs nationally, but the administrations have to treat them as such. You know, like IU is a wonderful baseball situation, and I don't think Jeff Mercer would ever leave there. But if he keeps winning games the way he's winning, he's going to have temptations, right? There are going to be people contacting him. Link Jarrett, you know, Mitch Hanna's, you know, the more support ISU can give him, the better program he's going to continue to develop. I mean, this guy can really do it. I mean, this is a program that year in and year out, they're in contention for the NCAA tournament, and those are the teams that eventually kind of pop their way through to Omaha. So I think it's more an investment piece than anything else, because they're wonderful schools. It's a great place to live. There's great players that you can recruit. There's so many positives.
As I touched on before, like any type of school that you want is in that state. I don't care if you want a large state school. I don't care if you want a really good private school. You have all kinds of options at every level of college baseball in that state. And it's a great baseball state. People in that state, I know everybody talks about basketball. Southern Indiana, they like baseball just as much as basketball down in that area. So it's a great baseball state, and historically has had great players that have impacted the landscape of baseball in college and in professionally. And, you know, it doesn't always get the credit it deserves. But when you really deep dive into what the state does for baseball, it impacts. And so, like I said, like you have options of everything that you want there, and it's going to be close for you too. But as Rune said, this might be the best time for the state for the coaching that's in there for Division I, because everybody has somebody that can coach at the school that they're at. Every one of those guys can coach in state.
Guys, I appreciate it. We're going to continue our journey across the state as we cover the 2022 college baseball scene in the Hoosier State.